studied him in our journey group. And he's from Texas, but he's a man of great faith, and he's very concerned about justice in the world. And he marched in the 60s with Martin Luther King. He told this funny little story that happened to him, and it's hard to believe that it's actually true, but text wouldn't lie. He said that one day he was driving in a car with a person that he didn't identify, and this person was concerned about the rapture. And he said to text, "I want you to be prepared that the rapture could happen at any time. And so, as you know, one will be taken up and one will be left. So I want you to know that when I'm taken up, be prepared, because you're going to have to grab the wheel so that you don't crash when I'm lifted up to heaven." Text's comment was, "Well, he won't be raptured, he'll be ruptured." I tell you that story because there are people who really take apocalyptic literature literally, and it gets us into all kinds of trouble. And so what we need to do is understand what it really is, and because we read about it and we hear about it. Apocalyptic literature is about revelations. Revelations about the end of the world as we know it and the new world that will come. Now, this transition that takes place comes in the form of transformations, which are cosmic in scope and nature, and have to do with judgments of failed people and institutions, and as well the vindication of God's saints. That's what it's all about. We all pray that we're one of God's saints because we will be vindicated. So that's a pretty good definition. Now, we see it in the Bible, and as I said at the beginning, you'll find it in the Old Testament in Isaiah. That was apocalyptic literature in Isaiah today. You'll see it in Daniel by a great deal. You also hear it in the Gospels, as we heard in Luke today, and you'll hear it in the book of Revelation. And what it has to do with, it's usually preceded by great historical crises. That's what sort of precipitates it. And so when you hear of this, you start hearing about apocalyptic literature. Now, what prompted Jesus' apocalyptic speech today in Luke was the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. And so he gave this discourse because the disciples wanted to know what it meant. It may seem kind of crazy to us to read this today, but what it shows is the great faith that the people had at the time. People who were suffering long-term pain and suffering. They were looking towards heaven to get a revelation from God and to get a vision of the end of their present misery and looking forward to the age that will come for them. So you can be sure that the people of Luke's time really wanted to hear what Jesus had to say about this. What we have to understand as well is that whether we go or Jesus comes, your personal theology will not change the end of the world. It's going to come whether we like it or not, and it will come with judgment and redemption. And so we have this question about, well, what really is it? How is the world going to end? Let's look at how Luke describes this today. He talks about a time when the disciples were in Jerusalem and they're at the temple, and it was a magnificent structure. And that's what the disciples were saying. They were looking to Jesus and saying, "Look at this magnificent temple, all these huge stones and this beautiful artwork and glass and all of that. Isn't it wonderful?" And they got this reply from Jesus, "Well, I'm going to tell you that one day this thing will all be destroyed. It will be brought right to the ground. And I don't want you to put your faith in buildings because they don't last." And they said, "Well, if that's going to happen, when will it happen and what will be the signs?" And so then he goes into this discourse and he says to them, "Well, when this time comes, be careful that you don't listen to false prophets and false teachings. And you're going to see insurrections and wars and earthquakes and tidal waves. All of these things will happen, but that won't be the end." And then he says that there's going to be a time when you're going to be brought before kings and people in the temple leaders, to be asked to give your faith, and you need not to think about what you're going to say in advance, because the words will come to you, words of wisdom, and you will be cared for. So, you can understand that Jesus is saying, well, all of this has to happen because it's part of the great history and God's purpose for this world. And so the people in Luke's time would say, okay, I guess this suffering that we're going through, it's not going to last. Something better is going to come. We'll be okay. Now, as time went on, it didn't happen, did it? I mean, we haven't had the second coming. Jesus hasn't come back. The world hasn't been destroyed as we know it. And so people kind of started to wonder about that. And in Paul's time, as you heard in the reading of Thessalonica today, the people of Thessalonica, some of them were being idle. They weren't doing anything. They were lying around. They weren't working. They expected people to feed them. And Paul was against this. He said, no, you can't do this. You have to work for your food. He said, I've worked for my food. I didn't have it given to me. You're lying around because you think the end is coming, and so you've given up. And you can't do that. So this feeling was around at the time. What is that? Pay attention over there, Clark. I'm just getting to the good part. How is the world going to end? If you talk to scientists, you will hear things like the Big Bang Theory. The Earth will explode into a million stars. You hear the exact opposite in the Big Crunch, that we will implode the world. Some scientists talk about the sun. The sun is 5 billion years old. Did you know that? Look that up. 5 billion years old. And scientists believe that in time, in another 5 billion years, the sun will grow to 10 million times the size it is now. And if that happens, well, you know what's going to happen to the world. It's going to be burned to a crisp. So we have many theories as to how the world will end. And we all want to know how it's going to happen. So what are we to think? What's going to happen? As Christians, we believe that there is a life beyond this, or that there is something beyond this. We say this in our creed. We look for the resurrection of the life to come, the resurrection of the life to come, and Jesus to return. We say that in the Nicene Creed. So we have been brought up to believe that the world will end, Jesus will come back, and there will be a place for us. The church has used this over the ages not very well. I think in some ways they've used this to exploit people, to instill fear in them, because can you imagine that they are actually encouraging people to have this selfish attitude that somehow, like the Texas friend, is going to be taken up while Texas is going to be destroyed and left behind. I really don't think that's going to happen. That's bad theology. And but there are people who believe this. There was a whole series of books written called the Left Behind series. I think Hal Lindsey had something to do with that. Bad theology. There is no way that one day the rapture will happen and one will be taken and the other one will be left. It's not going to happen that way. And if I'm wrong, I apologize. That's right. What can I say? What did Jesus mean when he spoke that way, according to Luke? I think what he was saying is, and you can see that if you even took today, you would see we have that tidal wave in the Philippines, we've got wars in Syria, we have wars in Africa, we have starvation around the world, all of the things that were listed there. And all Jesus was saying is, that's going to always happen. You will always have that, and there are going to be trials and tribulations. But what I want you to know is that I want you to keep your faith. I don't want you to become cynics, like the people in Thessalonica, who were sitting around saying, well, there's no use, I'm not going to work. The world's only going to be destroyed anyway. No, I want you to keep your faith, because all of these things will happen, and the end of the world won't come immediately. And so, what we've done over the years is terrible theology in explaining this to people, and I think that we've used it in ways to scare people, to get them to do what we want them to do. So, But what I really think we need to do with these lections today is think about our life here now. What are we about? I think Jesus is saying to the disciples, don't worry about the end of the world. Worry about here and now. And worry about what you're going to do with the time that you have. Let's face it, there's two things we can't avoid in life, I've been told. Death and taxes. We're all going to face those. And we can't get out of it. There's no wiggle room. It's going to happen to us. So, that thought and that knowledge should help us to put our lives into perspective. And say, well, okay, I'm not here forever. I don't know how long I'm going to be here. But I need to think about what I'm going to do with the time that I do have. Because I really shouldn't be wasting it. I really shouldn't be wasting it. And if you ask Jesus, to say, if you could ask him to say, well, what should I do? Jesus would probably say, and Christians would probably say, be about the work of the kingdom. That's how Christians would say it. Other religions would say it differently. But I think that they all would say, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, the golden rule. And so if you are about trying to help people who are poor, destitute, hungry, homeless, if you're about trying to help those things in the world, in your part of the world, then you're about the work of the kingdom. And that's what we should be concerned about. I love it when I can do funerals and talk about people who have been about that work. When I do eulogies where I can say, surely this person was about the work of the kingdom, and their life had purpose and meaning, and the world is a better place because of the things that they did. That's about, I think, because we read this stuff in Scripture sometimes, and we just, if you take it literally, you're in trouble. You really are. And they should be, as they would be for the people in Luke's time, it should be words of encouragement. Really should be. Because it's inevitable that all of these things are going to happen. I don't think there's been a time in history, let alone my life, where there hasn't been a war somewhere, where there hasn't been an earthquake somewhere, where there hasn't been one of these things that was listed in Luke today. They will always happen. We're all very concerned and upset about what's going on in the Philippines right now. And the numbers are atrocious. They're approaching 6,000 people, or over 6,000 I think it is. And they didn't have a chance. I mean, that just came in and totally destroyed everything that they had. And it's a miracle that anybody's even living after all of that. And we feel very fortunate to be living where we are. And so the world is getting together and to help these people in whatever way we can. Because that's why we're here. We're here to help people who aren't able to help themselves. So when you go home today, if anybody asks you, well, what did he go on about today? Well, he went on about the end of the world. Don't worry about it. We can't do anything about it. Think about what you're doing here now.